Hello there, and welcome to another pre-recorded lectures for part of our A and P series. Some of you may have taken chemistry in high school, may have taken it in college. The high school or chemistry or the chemistry course may have been just a couple years ago, and some it may be a few years ago. So I want to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to our basic knowledge. So we're going to go over some of the basics of chemistry for the purposes of this course. Okay, so we have something called organic and inorganic compounds. Organic compounds are things that are livable. Inorganic compounds are not living. So let's talk about water. I'm a huge fan of Adam Sandler, so you're going to see a lot of these type of things in our lecture series. Water, well, we drink it, right? And we're supposed to be drinking mainly just water. We're up to about 70 to 80% of water, and that makes up most of our volume. Water has a high heat capacity, so that's why it's a perfect medium for the body. It allows heat to be retained. It also has a high heat to vaporize it, meaning that it takes a really high temperature to make it go poof and become a steam. And that's good because if we're hanging out in the desert, we don't want to go poof out of nowhere. And it's also known as universal solvent, which means that anything can be dissolved in it. So any solute can be dissolved into water. It's polar. So polar means that the solute dissolves because of its ability to be attracted to one another. Okay. So a brief overview of the periodic table of elements. So each of these elements is a portion or makes an atom. Okay. So the most abundant elements in the human body are nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon. We don't have to go into the super duper parts about this, but the first column is all the organic salts that we have. The last column actually, you don't even have to know about that one. Never mind. So salt. It's an ionic compound, which means it has normally a positive charge or a negative charge, and it's associated with something else. So if we put NaCl, which is your table salt, into water, what will happen is that it'll dissolve into its ions. So go for the chloride, which is a negative ion, also known as an anion, and a sodium, which is a positive ion. And then common salts that we find in the body are potassium chloride, sodium chloride. So K stands for potassium, Cl stands for chloride. The CaCO3 is calcium carbonate, and then NaCl is your typical salt, so sodium chloride. So we're going to hear a lot, especially when we get to the blood and respiratory and kidney, about acids and bases. So this little joke here, I'm also a huge fan of this show, Futurama, where he's asking you to take all his hydrogens, which is the joke, because acid and bases are based about their hydrogen concentration. So when we have acids taste sour. And I'm not going to tell people to go put their tongue on anything, but trust me, they taste sour. What they do is they release hydrogen ions, and they're proton donors. So when we have HCl, we have the H, which is hydrogen, which is the proton, and Cl, which is chloride, is an anion. So if we were to dissolve that into water, that's how it would break up. And then bases have a bitter taste to them. And typically, going back to acids, hydrogen ions are the main player here. Bases are this hydroxide ion, or OH negative. They accept protons. And for the ones that are bases, the ones that we're going to be seeing most common is ammonia, which is NH3, and bicarbonate, which is HCO3. And then with pH, so we don't want something ever to be super acidic because that can literally burn through things. And same thing with basic, that can burn through things. So homeostasis, right? We always want to keep things in balance. So our our body, sorry, it's been a long day, guys. Our body has a buffer system, and this helps our body solution stay at a neutral pH. So neutral is about 7.35 to 7.45 on the pH scale. And of note, the pH scale is on a scale of 1, which is the most acidic, and 10 is the most basic. The stomach acid that's in your belly is about a 2. Okay? So with homeostasis, as I said, we need to keep this balance in check. Imagine like peeing and leaving all the acid in your blood. What would that do? You just burn up on the inside. And if we go back to our previous lecture about hypertonic solutions, if something was more acidic or basic, what do you think this would do to our cells? And buffers also help keep our blood and oxygen levels acceptable in the bicarbonate buffer system. So that is all about keeping things not too acidic, not too basic. And then buffers, they're mainly, we wanted to become a way to dissociate. So buffers help things become a weak acid or a weak base. So we want to keep that pH, and I want you to remember this, the 7.35 to 7.45 is your physiologic neutral pH. And we're going to take a look at this very fancy equation called the bicarbonate buffer system later on. But just for a basic idea here, is that CO2 plus water, when we put that together, is carbonic acid. And then when we when we put it in water, it does not, they do not fully dissociate. So you get a hydrogen ion, but you also get a bicarbonate ion, if that makes sense. Okay, so we kind of chatted about this a little bit, but I just want to make sure that everyone is really understanding this about carbohydrates, okay? So if anyone knows System of a Down, the song Sugar, you can definitely sing that to yourself. But sugars come in different forms, and it's based about the number of molecules. So glucose, fructose, galactose, ribose, and deoxyribose, which is found in DNA, it's the D in DNA, are monosaccharides. So they're just one unit, a simple sugar. So glucose is what our body uses for most of its body. It's what our body uses most for energy. Fructose is found in fruit. Galactose is found in milk products. Okay. And then we have disaccharides, which means we're putting two things together. So sucrose is a table sugar. And I don't want you guys to worry about what goes where because we're not biochemists. We have maltose and we have lactose, which is milk sugar. And then, are you hyper yet? Because I feel like we're talking about all the sugar. Woohoo! So we got polysaccharides, which means there are multiple chains of either disaccharides or monosaccharides put together. The most common ones are glycogen and starch. And we're going to learn all about glycogen, especially when we get to the musculoskeletal system, the heart, and liver, because glycogen is our body's storage of glucose. And then starch, that's mainly when we think of foods. So when we're eating like pasta, that's a starch, not a glycogen. And pasta is a polysaccharide. Okay? So the fun facts about fats. 1, don't be afraid of fat. 2, they don't dissolve in water. So have you ever tried to put olive oil in vinegar or olive oil in water and you always get those bubbles? It's because they don't dissolve together. Okay, so we have triglycerides, which are a solid fat. It's what we see around if we were to look at abdominal, basically anywhere in the body where you find body fat. But if you were to open up a body and you would see, if you were doing like a dissection of the human body, you would see this bright yellow gold material a second that you get through all the layers, and that is triglycerides. They come in a few different types: unsaturated, saturated, that should say trans fat, and they serve as food and energy. And the building block, as I said before, is a fatty acid with a glycerol tail, and then phospholipid is a specialized type of lipid that has a phosphate group, and we're going to find those in our plasma membranes. Then we have steroids, and not the woo, we're going to get pumped up kind of steroids. Steroids are actually the backbone of cholesterol, and cholesterol is super important. It makes part of our plasma membranes. It helps with sex hormone production, so the estrogen, testosterone, our stress hormones. Steroids are the precursor to vitamin D, and steroids are a precursor to bile salts, and bile salts help emulsify or dissolve up fat from our diet so we can reabsorb it and use it. And the cholesterol aspect is, I'm sure everyone's familiar if they ever had their cholesterol tested. So proteins. So proteins, as the when we're talking about, if we remember from the previous lecture, we're talking about when they're being made, amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. They're most basic unit. It's like a glucose, but for proteins. Okay. And the DNA that we have in our body is programmed to give your RNA the directions of how to make these. So that's your mRNA to tRNA. And then proteins come in a lot of different types. We have the structural proteins like like collagen or fibrous tissue. We have enzymes, kind of similar to that carbonic anhydrase that I was talking about. The proteins serve as transport. We'll learn in the blood that hemoglobin is a protein that helps transport oxygen. When we get to the musculoskeletal, we'll learn that about myosin and actin, how those type of proteins help make a muscle contraction. Proteins are antibodies. Antibodies help our body defend off invaders. And then also, lots of proteins can actually serve as hormones. So an example is insulin. Insulin is a type of protein, but also a type of hormone. And then we have DNA and RNA and ATP. So DNA, we're going to remember, is the genetic code. It's the directions and how our body is programmed to make things. Now, when there's some errors in that, so we call it mutations, that's when we have whoopsie-daisies and changes to our body, okay? And then ATP is the energy for our cells, and we have two different processes that we made by, and that's glycolysis, if you recall from the previous lecture, which makes 2 ATP, and then Krebs cycle makes more. It's about 32 to 36, and we can make ATP for our body by breaking down carbs, fat, and proteins. This is why we eat. We eat to give our bodies energy. So I know a lot of this was in the previous lecture, but just in case what it needed a little bit more explanation, you now have it in a more succinct form. Reminder that next week we're going to take a deeper look at a lot of the processes, including histology and skin. And I hope you guys have a really nice weekend. Keep safe. And that's all. All right. Bye-bye.